update to be presented at this time, and I think we're going to have Dr. Matt Hoskins, who's going to start out the conversation. And again, this conversation ties in with our strategic plans for whole child, and again, talking about equity and good information. So, Dr. Hoskins, will you come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Superintendent Johnson, State Board, friends, stakeholders that are joining us online. It really is an honor and a privilege to present this today, and I use the term privilege intentionally to speak to this body on the topic of social emotional learning. And not only that, the critical role that social emotional learning can play as a lever for equity is a privilege for all of us. All of us that are here and listening to this are in service to students, to families, to educators, because I believe strongly that we all hold some collective values, and that we chose this service in education because we have a common goal. I think all of us share a strongly held belief that the public education is intended to be the great equalizer, particularly in situations in which individuals have different needs, have different opportunities and pathways to meet those needs. We work collaboratively across the state to provide every young person an equitable opportunity to pursue their dreams and to contribute to the greater good. And as Dr. Flood so eloquently reminded us as he spoke, all the schools belong to all the people. And as we contemplate the goals that we have ahead of us, we're faced with a stark reality that a large part of our work is eliminating discriminatory barriers to full participation for every student in North Carolina. This ranges from the soft bigotry of low expectations. Dr. Flood described this during his conversation when he described the studies of Dr. Rosenthal and the impact that expectations have on outcomes. We know that there are disproportionate disciplinary actions that are taken when students of color engage in the same behaviors as white students that result in different disciplinary outcomes, special education placements. We know this from students of color historically having less frequent course placements in higher level mathematical courses. There's plenty of data and compelling data that urge us to respond. And as was mentioned in the prior conversation as well, is what we are dealing with is not an achievement gap that we're trying to overcome. It's an opportunity gap that we're trying to overcome. And we're not going to be able to solve this problem unless we recognize that and we take action to directly address it. And I like to look for places of opportunity in crisis, and I do think that an opportunity presents itself now. And as is mentioned in this definition here, these systemic issues have been courageously recognized and addressed by this board in the development of this definition and a strategic plan that truly champions equity. And that's clearly apparent in the definition that is here on this slide, that clearly operationalizes and details what equity is. And what's important for the folks that will be presenting to you today to share, and what we're really delighted and excited to have the opportunity to share, is that there is a lot of thinking, a lot of hard work, a lot of dedication of individuals across the state that are actively engaged in a concerted effort to achieve this goal, and ensuring that we turn this definition of equity into day-to-day action in classrooms across the state. What is known, what we know is that evidence, what we know from well-designed research controlled situations is not the same as efficacy. So what happens in real world situations when we try to apply those things? Implementation, changing behaviors, changing thoughts, changing perceptions, particularly when it's entrenched within a complex system, it's a difficult thing to do. And systemic issues can only be addressed when we take systemic actions to address them. And again, I really appreciated the perspective provided by Dr. Flood this morning that gave us a really great reminder of the incredible amount of arduous work that's been completed to this point in time and the goals that we have been able to accomplish up to this point in time. I think it provides all of us motivation. It provides all of us the courage to face the work that we have ahead of us. Has been so well expressed by others. We know that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And our work is gonna have to continue to progress over time. And so to that end, what we wanna share today is a systemic approach that champions social emotional learning, as you see in this slide, as a lever of equity. And the reason that we see social emotional learning as a lever is because it does tackle this issue systematically with both the adults within our school buildings across the state, as well as the students. And I think that you will see that's clear in what you see in the presentation following this. We know that the competencies that are defined and described in research in social emotional learning apply to all students, regardless of race, ethnicity, class, religion, or gender. It includes things like developing one's self-awareness, affirming one's identity, being able to ask questions like, who am I? And taking that a little bit further so we can have more nuanced conversations so that we can base our instruction more to those students who are standing in front of us. So in the thought of using social emotional learning as a lever, I would like to now turn this over to my colleague, Angel Batts, as she describes the work that is being completed to achieve this goal within the Integrated Academic and Behavior Support Division. I'll turn it over to Angel now.
Thank you, Dr. Hoskins. Good morning. I'm Angel Goodwine-Batts, and I have the pleasure of leading the Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems Division's team. We believe that a multi-tiered system of support is the most efficient and effective way to improving schools and student outcomes, thereby ensuring a sound basic education for all. As we share this update on social emotional learning today, we will talk about it within the context of a multi-tiered system of support. North Carolina MTSS is a school improvement framework which encompasses academic, behavioral, and social emotional instructional support. This framework employs a systems approach using data-driven problem solving to maximize growth for all. There are 6 critical components within a well-functioning or healthy MTSS. All 6 of these components are critical when we think about social emotional learning. As we go to the next slide, we're going to look more in depth at one of the 6 critical components, the one on 3-tiered instructional intervention model. With all of the work, including COVID-19 support, we always start first with core support, which is the support that we provide to all students. Within core support for social emotional learning and mental wellness, we look at our curriculum and instruction that both explicitly teach social emotional skills and embed social emotional learning throughout the school building and school day. Both school-based and community-based mental health are also embedded into core supports. The goal is a seamless system of support where common language is utilized to support all students. Supplemental support for social emotional learning and mental wellness is provided through a standard treatment protocol where we define the intervention system through instruction, curriculum, and environment, and data decision rules. As we define our intervention systems, we go ahead and make plans on how we will intensify that intervention when needed. Again, the intervention system, those supplemental and intensive supports, include both school-based interventions such as mentoring, check-in, check-out, or small social skills groups, as well as mental health supports through school-based and community-based mental health. Foundational to the success of the integration of SEL and mental wellness within the MTSS is building capacity of staff and developing adult SEL, collaborating with community partners and families to support the whole child, and cultivating a school climate that promotes engagement and a sense of belonging for all students, all staff, and all stakeholders. Next, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Beth Rice, our IAPS consultant, practices lead, and CASEL Collaborating State Initiative CSI lead. She will guide us as we look at the state's teaming structures that is supporting this integrated SEL work and its key activities.
Thank you, Dr. Hoskins and Ms. Batts. Good morning. I am Beth Rice. In 2019, North Carolina joined the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL's Collaborating States Initiative, and we formed a cross-agency and cross-division team, the North Carolina Social Emotional Learning Implementation Team. The purpose of this team is to define and scale up consistent social emotional learning systems and practices that promote both equity and mental wellness. Our team representation includes both the Department of Public Instruction and the Department of Health and Human Services. Currently, 8 divisions are represented from the Department of Public Instruction, including Career and Technical Education, Center for Safer Schools, Exceptional Children, Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems, North Carolina Virtual Public Schools, Office of Early Learning, Regional Support Team, and Standards Curriculum and Instruction. We also have 2 divisions within the Department of Health and Human Services, including the Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities and Substance Abuse Services, and Community Mental Health, and the Division of Public Health. In 2019, we focused on cross-agency and cross-division collaboration. We started our integrated work with a reflection on our current implementation of social emotional learning and built an implementation plan. Our integrated work included resource mapping state-level social emotional learning and school mental health resources through collaboration with Project Aware, and presenting to NCDPI division directors. This year, we focused on leveraging key resources. We have mapped existing standards with the CASEL core competencies, showing where social emotional learning already exists in our current standards. When we started the SEL standards mapping work, we were especially encouraged when 12 content areas came to the table to support this work. The SEL standards mapping work will be available to the field this month. To support COVID-19, we believe it is important to leverage existing resources, which help to connect to existing work taking place in districts and charters. To do this, we collaborated with the group focused on social emotional learning and supported the building of the COVID-19 SEL and Crisis Response Practice Guide. We leveraged existing online courses, including the core SEL practices for district and school teams, and Friday Institute's SEL for Educators course, and free resources, including Castle's district and school online centers. We are already hearing from districts that implementing social emotional learning can both help staff to adjust to COVID-19 and reduce staff burnout. On the next slide, you will see our focus areas. This summer, the North Carolina Social Emotional Learning Implementation Team updated our implementation plan. We utilized these 4 focus areas recommended by Castle, which are building foundational support and plan, strengthening adult SEL competencies and capacity, promoting SEL for students, and using data for continuous improvement. A couple of key activities from our updated implementation plan will be highlighted. This summer, we have integrated equity throughout our implementation plan. We launched the 3 signature practices, which are welcoming inclusion activities, engaging strategies, and optimistic closure. These 3 signature practices are important for both students and staff as we transition back to school, as they help to build a sense of community and safety. We believe it is critical for us to model these practices at the state and district level before teachers utilize these practices with students. This fall, we will leverage both student and family voice to build our state SEL vision. We look forward to sharing this work with you in the future. And we are excited to share an upcoming launch of a 15-month SEL and Equity virtual conference, which will be available to all LEAs, including charters. This will include a community of practice for LEA staff to both network and share with others across the state. Several activities support communication, including informing our directors and launching an upcoming SEL module for NCDPI staff. Now, we are grateful for the opportunity to hear from one of our leading districts, Cleveland County Schools' Terry Putnam, who is the Project Aware Director and Lead Mental Health Liaison. Thank you.
In case you don't know, Cleveland County is in the southwest region of North Carolina. You see it highlighted on the PowerPoint slide. We're the 23rd largest school system in North Carolina, and we have 64% free and reduced lunch in our 30 schools. On the next slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Project Aware. Again, I'm the Project Aware Director in Cleveland County. AWARE stands for Advancing Wellness and Resiliency in Education. Project Aware is a 5-year grant that's funded through the National Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. Cleveland County is one of the 3 North Carolina LEAs chosen as a Project Aware pilot site. Rockingham County in the Piedmont region and Beaufort County Schools in the eastern region of North Carolina are other 2 sites. North Carolina DPI and North Carolina Division of Mental Health partnered to write this grant, and we are in year 2 of the 5-year Project Aware grant. Project Aware funding made a significant impact on Cleveland County building a systems of support for all students. When we talk about equity, we have to have systems in place that will meet the needs of all students. So my coworkers talked about building core. So that was the first thing we did. We tried to strengthen our core instruction for all students by training our staff in social emotional learning programs, and then so they could therefore teach students those lessons. We also, having the additional resources, allowed us to create a suicide risk assessment. Once we created that, we trained all 30 schools, specific teams, so they could have a higher understanding of what suicidal ideation looks like, when a student may be at risk, and then specifically and most important, we had a protocol of what to do when that happened. Our Project Aware funds allowed us to hire additional mental health staff to have in our schools so they could respond and assist the school staff. We also had additional staff that create greater partnerships with our local mental health providers so they could, we could more seamlessly allow school-based therapy to be in our schools. When COVID hit, it was so important that we had these systems in place. We were able to assist our local mental health school-based providers to transition into teletherapy. So it took really the whole team to get that to happen. So during COVID, as of March this year, we all remember probably where we were that day. We have served 182 students for teletherapy, and those 182 students had 918 sessions. So when we talk about equity, we can't get to school and parents can't get to the office because of transportation or childcare or economic disparities, we were able to provide those students with teletherapy. I feel really good that our community came together to allow that to happen. If it wasn't for the Project Aware funding, we wouldn't have had the systems in place. So when the crisis happened, we would just be spinning our wheels. So that is what this work has allowed our district to have. Again, we talk a lot about systems, practices, and support. Next slide. Project Aware funding, again, allows our staff to be more involved with the integrated academic and behavior supports team at DPI. And you heard Beth and the other folks speak about that we want to have SEL, social emotional learning implementation in our district. So what you're looking at on this slide are the key components of if a district has SEL implementation with fidelity. So one of the key components is that you align community partnerships. And so in Cleveland County, we are fortunate to have multitudes of agencies that want to help students and families. But what we know is that we have to work together. We have to know what each agency's vision is, and then we want to align those so we can make sure we're working smarter, not harder. So we created an interagency council where we have, it was amazing to see all of the agencies. We had representation from all of our police forces, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, on and on. We had probably 25 agencies represented. And we got together, and first thing we started with was a resource map. What did we have in place? And then what were the gaps? What did we need to put in for our district so we could serve all families and all students? Another indicator of SEL implementation is having an academic instruction and classroom climate to support social emotional learning. So I'll talk more about that on the next slide. Okay. So SEL, or social emotional learning, should be part of a school's master schedule. So what we know is it's not written down. It probably is not going to happen. So we want, and we have in our system, specific times in each school's master schedule where they're going to teach social and emotional lessons. It doesn't sound real hard, but when you look at a systems approach, that was a huge win for us to get that in place. Our district has successfully done that. We're not perfect, but we do have explicit social emotional lessons at each school. A big part of having a social emotional curriculum is that you have opportunities for student interaction. So just like good academic instruction, you just don't teach at kids, but you interact and have opportunities to know that they are learning the skill. So on student interaction, it was very important that we had that in place. So when COVID happened, we could switch it right over to virtual learning. And we have what we use Google Classroom primarily. So we had a Google check-in. So our students were home. Sometimes they were home alone. Sometimes they were home with a multitude of siblings all in the same house. So our teachers were encouraged to check in virtually so they could find out how the students were doing before they started math for that day. So what we know is students want to know how much you care before they learn whatever academic skill you have. If the teachers found that the students had some emotional or mental health issues going on, they were able to contact one of our mental health staff to provide whatever resource was needed. So again, having the systems in place allowed our staff to respond in a seamless manner once COVID hit. Okay. I'll talk more about that on our next slide. So a big part, and everybody in education is aware that schools have to have a supportive school climate for any academic success typically to happen. So this work that we're doing is a big part of it is trying to create a supportive school climate for both the adults in the building and the students. I really get excited about watching staff shift their thinking around student social emotional issues and what behavior, when a student misbehaves, what does that mean? How we've done that in our district is we've done a lot of training to increase their understanding of what poverty does to children, what mental illness does, substance abuse. And you can see on the slide, we've done poverty simulations. Those have been very successful. We've trained 400 of our staff and 200 community partners. We are just starting with restorative practices, and we're excited. Everything we've done, we are putting in a digital format. So this year we have training that is online. We're doing digital book studies. Youth mental health first aid is one of probably the most well-known curriculum that schools use to increase the knowledge of mental health issues with staff. In Cleveland County, we have trained 100 staff members. We will now put the training online for this year. Our district adopted the community resiliency model, which is called CRIM. That is it's a very simple approach to teaching kids what they're feeling and how to regulate their emotions. That is something we did not teach before, and it's really important. A lot of students don't know why they're feeling what they're feeling and what to do about it. We teach CRIM to our staff, have them use it with themselves, and then they teach it to their students. It's been a very successful initiative in our school system. And finally, we have trained our staff in a program called Question, Persuade, and Refer, and that QPR. And that's just a way for staff to recognize if a student is showing signs of suicidal ideation and then what to do. So again, I'm very excited to see all the work that our system has been able to do with being a part of the Project Aware grant. And I'll just open up to any questions.
Thank you very much. Board members, any questions at this time? Very good work.
Thank you.
Mr. Keenan, this is Olivia.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for this very good presentation that gives insight into how one school district is approaching SEI. I'm proud, on a personal note, I'm proud to say that I'm the grandmother of one of your recent high school graduates, and we have him off to college today. So
wonderful news.
That's bringing Cleveland County to my home. So that's a good thing. Just a question. This question has been on my mind for several months. The more we, at the state board table, we discuss SEI and its importance to the success of a student's life in school and life beyond. Tell me your opinion of where alternative placement fits in the world of SEI when we take a student out of the regular school classroom and place them in a separate setting. I think in an ideal world of education, the best place for that child, the student might still be in the traditional school, but talk about SEI in the world of alternative education.
Hi, Dr. Oxendine. This is Matt Hoskins, and I'm happy to take this question. I appreciate you asking this. As Beth described, they have been doing some really significant work crosswalking the National Center that really focuses on social emotional learning has set up 5 different competencies, things like self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. These are those social emotional competencies that all students will benefit from, and then based on the characteristics of those competencies, we believe promote equity. And the work that they're doing is aligning that to academic standards to see how can this work be integrated throughout the course of the day in a universal way that all students can have access to. So I think that would be universally, not dependent upon the placement or the setting in which the student was receiving instruction. Does that?
Well, I understand your answer, and I understand the way you framed it. I agree. I'm still kind of bothered by, I don't know how to frame it. I just think that ideally it's in that school setting where we want to see the child placed. And it's no condemnation, disparaging thoughts around alternative placements, because I know there is a reason for that. But sometimes I wonder if the students don't perceive that placement is not an example of equity.
So thank you, and I appreciate that comment. And those are certainly things. And when you're referring to alternative placements, are you referring to situations for behavior for students?
Yes, I'm thinking about alternative schools within
Okay.
schools.
Okay. Yeah, and I think as teams come together and make some determinations about the level of support that is required to meet an individual student's needs based on assessment and the data that they have, that part of the training that we provide is how to make those decisions that best align a student's needs to the setting in which they're placed. And then also the setting then results in the intensity of services that are able to be provided in some situations.
Okay, therein I think
Matt,
is the answer. It's making sure that resources are maximized in an alternative school, a school within a school, a placement outside the regular school setting.
Exactly.
Dr. Oxendine.
I'll add, this is Carrie Putnam with Cleveland County Schools, and I think you make a really good point about that the best place for kids usually is their home school. And to me, that is part of equity, that most students want to be in their home school. But what we know when we use a multi-tiered system of support is that if their needs show that they have a great number of needs that can't be met by their school, then we should have additional resources to serve them, because they deserve a free a public education. So in our district, we have a day treatment. And so if a student's mental illness impacts their ability to be in a regular school setting, then we have a day treatment that is located on one of our school settings, our sites. And an average stay is probably 6 months to 8 months, depending on that specific student's needs. And then we do a slow transition back to their home school. And during that time, what we're doing is, you talked about how does SEL fit into an alternative setting. Well, it should be a primary issue if students have mental health or emotional issues. So while they're in that alternative setting, we are focusing strongly on teaching them self-regulation and social emotional skills, as well as having counseling for them. But the goal always is to transition them back to their home school. So on a district level, that is what I can say is that alternative settings are important to meet the needs of students that have the highest, they're at risk and have, sorry, we have an alarm here, and I'm going to turn that off and let someone else speak. Thank you.
Dr. Oxendine, this is Bev Emery. If I might also add, I think the power of your question is also in how well we implement this framework. Because if we are implementing it with the assessments correctly, we should be able to identify ahead of time those patterns and needs of students. And so instead of the sort of punitive mindset we have around alternative, we offer opportunities ahead of the difficulty or the challenge for some of these students. And we have examples of that around the state. But I think that's the power of this framework if we implement it with a preventative mindset versus an intervention only mindset.
That is well stated and framed quite well, because over time, again, I want to double line my point about not being disparaging against alternative schools, because there is certainly a role they play in the overall education of our students. But the fact remains, in the minds of kids who are placed there, and in the minds of families, parents, they do see it naturally as something's gone wrong with my child in this regular setting. And if MTSS is certainly one of those mechanisms that can be all about prevention, so the student has full opportunity to stay in place. If equity is going to be manifested anywhere, and it will be, I see it truly needing to take hold in settings outside the regular school, in the alternative school setting, to make sure that teachers are well prepared, they are focused in a clinical kind of therapeutic way, and the resources are abundant. Thank you so much, Mr. Keenan, for giving me more than my share of time.
Thanks, Ms. Octon, for your great comments. Anyone else from the board like to ask any questions at this time?
Mr. Keenan, Wendell Hall.
Okay, take it away.
I have a couple of questions. Number one, the lady previously was talking about the master schedule, and the classes were built through the master schedule. Number one is that K-12? Is it only for a certain school level? Who teaches those classes during this time, and how long is the class?
Thank you. Very good questions. This is Terry Putnam with Cleveland County.
Right.
So ideally, what we would like is for that to be taught in all schools. And the reality is, we are, you can only eat an elephant a bite at a time. So
That's
what
right.
we've done is we have pilot schools, and we are doing really well. We have elementary, middle, and high schools that we are piloting SEL curriculum and having that in there, having it in the master schedule, and they're doing great. And we follow all the MTSS guidelines. I can tell you that every elementary school in this county, social emotional learning is happening on at least a weekly basis. And who's teaching it? What you heard folks talk about, our core instruction, and that's every student gets this. And who teaches it is the classroom teacher. And it only has to be 10 to 15 minutes. And teachers in olden days would have just embedded it in their instruction. After, when someone had a fight, they would talk about how do you get along. But what we want to have intentional times that we're teaching. So teachers teach it. If kids need additional, what we call supplemental or secondary, we'll bring in counselors. But in our district, I would say at least 2/3 of our schools are implementing social emotional learning in their master schedules with Fidelity. But we're shooting for 100%.
Right, but that is absolutely great, because I'm a firm believer, as others, in SEL. And, there are things that have to happen before the academic side of it can be successful. And especially now with COVID-19, children being home since last March? And some environments that it's less than perfect, I'll leave it at that they've had to experience. Let me go back to project where this is the second year of a 5-year project. Am I correct?
Excuse me?
I'm sorry. This is the second year of the 5-year grant. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes.
How many staff members do you have that's paid out of the grant?
Very good question. I will say that the grant years for this national grant, they run October 1st through September 30th. So we're about to start year 3 when September 30th is around. So that's just one thing that's kind of interesting. But in our district, we have myself, the director, that's 100% funded. We have a data collection and trainer that's 100% funded, and we have 3 licensed mental health clinicians that are funded out of this grant.
Out of the grant, okay. Is there any materials that need to be purchased?
Yes.
Or that you purchase as a result of implementing this project awareness?
That is exactly right. We have the CREM that I talked about, Community Resiliency Model. We actually train 21 trainers in our school system to build capacity, because that is going to be our core. Every staff member knows it. So the funding allowed us to get those trainers, to buy materials to use in classrooms. We have materials for what we call resiliency rooms.
Yeah.
So when students are having a meltdown, instead of you're bad and you're leaving the classroom, it's you need a timeout and you can go to the resiliency room, and a staff member goes with them and helps them use the skills they've learned to calm down. So yes, it's for staff and materials and training is what that money is used for.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, without extending our time, because I know we're on a schedule, but in the future, I would like to have some follow-up to this particular program and see where it is, because it has worth to it. I know that. But I was hearing some things that maybe it's helpful, would be helpful to me and to others in this state before the project is up for reauthorization. Okay?
Thank you, Ms. Hall.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hall. You're exactly right. We'd like to have more updates in the near future, because great work is very necessary, as we know, because our children have to be healthy if they want to learn. So anyone else before we conclude this presentation? I know we're tight.
Mr. Keenan, this is Ms. Kamnitz. If I could just very briefly make a couple
Please
comments.
do.
First of all, it just strikes me so strongly as we listen to this presentation how deeply the social emotional learning work is embedded in our striving for equity and in our strategic plan. So important to continue to hear about this and put a priority on this work. I'm so impressed with what's happening in Cleveland County. And to sort of follow up on Mr. Hall, I'm wondering about sustainability here. It sounds like that the changes in the classrooms can continue, but the extra resources to hire more employees to do this work are obviously paying off. And so I'm wondering how that's going to be carried on afterwards. And I would also comment that this ties right into our budget priority, which would increase the resources around the state for carrying out this work.
Thank you very
Hi,
much.
this is Matt Hoskins, just to respond very briefly to that, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. We are very fortunate to have a robust evaluation that we are engaged in. We also have some external partners that are helping us with that. And those are the types of questions that we are trying to answer right now, is doing a fiscal analysis of, in terms of where funds are placed for perhaps mental health clinicians, where do we see the return on investment in that, and how can we do this not only from a practical way, but fiscally, how can we scale this across the state? And that will be something that we will be more than happy to share the details of at a future meeting when we talk through some more of the details of Project Aware.
Thank you very much. If no other questions, Mr. Chair, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. I now recognize Chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, Ms. White.
Thank you, Chair Davis. This is Amy White. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to greet you today. Sharing the responsibility and leading this committee is Ms. Jill Kamnitz. I understand through the chair that we will cover in this committee our action on first read, our action and our consent items, and then we're going to take a break for lunch. I just wanted to make you aware of that as you're planning if you are following us along at home. So our first item for review today is EICS 1, and this is Blue Green Academy's request to relinquish its charter. Dave Machado, Office of Charter Schools, will walk us through that. In summary, this is a charter school in Winston-Salem serving 5th and 6th graders who is not currently meeting the minimum statutory enrollment requirements, and they have decided to relinquish that charter. Mr. Machado, do you have any additional information for us?
Thank you, Ms. White. You summed it up very well. This school was open last year for their initial year, and all year they did struggle with getting enough students. After with the COVID-19 situation, they just were not able to recruit more students. They did have a facility issue too, so their board decided to voluntarily relinquish their charter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Machado. Board members, do you have any questions about this request? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to EICS 2. Board members, you heard this as a discussion item last year. This is the NC Asset Access subgrant recommendations, and these are the schools that are charter schools in our state which have applied for funding to increase the number of educationally disadvantaged students. Mr. Machado, would you like to just give us a brief summary on that process and where we are today?
Yes, thanks again, Ms. White. I want to begin by saying that I believe that this NC Access grant is probably the best kept secret in North Carolina. We are just so proud of what is happening with this grant, and it is truly moving the needle to increase diversity in our charter schools. And North Carolina is certainly doing what this grant was intended for. We currently have 34 sub-grant recommendations. It's going to total $17 million over 5 years. And when you look at the names of the schools that are on this list, they are some of our strongest, most mature, established schools that have totally committed to increasing the diversity in their schools. And we also want to add that along with this grant, that we also have the NC Access Fellows Program, where 2 leaders from every school form a cohort, and they do some very intense professional development throughout the year. We have also been able to, with the supplement grant that we got, be able to add leaders from low-performing schools to be able to attend these same sessions, and this has been very helpful. So we're just really excited about the slate of schools that we have put before you, and we look forward to getting the second cohort up and running. And I believe Mr. Whalen and Dr. O'Neill are on the call too, if you have any specific questions.
Board members, questions about the 34 recommendations for subgrants through the North Carolina Access Program?
Ms. White, this is Olivia. I have a quick question, if I may.
Sure, Dr. Oxentine.
Thank you so much, Mr. Machado. I hear the excitement and the thrill in your voice about this wonderful grant opportunity. If you would take just a minute and, because one of the goals, major goals, is to increase the presence and the attendance of minority students of color in the enrollment. Can you give just kind of a thumbnail of a strategy to do that?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Oxstein. To qualify for this grant, you must institute a weighted lottery. So that automatically will help us increase the diversity in our schools as far as economically disadvantaged students. And also part of the professional development that we offer through the fellowship program is how to go into those communities to recruit, how to do it face-to-face, how to do it through media, advertising, and that sort of thing. So it's very intentional to reach the target goals that our schools are saying they want to meet. And then we will monitor how their EDS population has increased over the years. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, that is a very good answer. And I probably have heard you talk about that weighted lottery, and that's a good tool for getting the diversity up. So yep, the more we can hear about strategy, directions to get us where we need to be, that's certainly helping Olivia. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. White.
Thank you, Dr.
And also, if I may add, Ms. White, it's our intention when we can schedule with the State Board of Ed to bring some of the school leaders that are currently in these cohorts to explain to you directly how this grant has impacted their school and how has it impacted their enrollment. And we're really excited about having those leaders attend the State Board meeting also.
Ms. White, JB.
Hi, JB. Question?
Thank you. It's a follow-up to Dr. Oxendine's. Mr. Machado, thanks for the presentation last month in this, and again, appreciate all the priority you and the department have put on this focus. Just a question, it's a process question, and it's based on some of the data you shared last month about progress towards goals and objectives for enrollment. And it was my memory, there was kind of a variety of schools in terms of meeting their enrollment goals or not. And so just a question, when we provide, and I'm going to pull this number out of the hat but when we provide $400,000 or $500,000 in a grant like this, what happens if a school has a weighted lottery, but there are just not that many candidates, educationally disadvantaged student candidates, and so their numbers are not appreciably moving? At what point do we look at the funding that continues to go there?
That's a great question. Thank you. This grant is issued in increments over the course of 5 years, and the schools have to submit their budget to us, and our NC Access team monitors that budget. So if they're not putting the right resources in the areas we feel are most beneficial, then we'll have that conversation with them. And then if the diversity numbers or the EDS population numbers are not moving to our satisfaction, we will either slow down the funds or stop the funds until they can give us some better information or some better results. Excuse me. We're just now in our second year of this, so we haven't had enough time to actually collect good data to see how this enrollment has increased. And Mr. Whalen or Dr. O'Neill, if you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, this is Jay Whalen. The only thing I would add is that we, in addition to the annual monitoring, we also conduct risk assessment reviews of all subgrantees. And one of the indicators is around enrollment. So stipulations around funding or how funds are spent, how quickly funds are spent, is sort of based on that risk assessment review as well. So we monitor that throughout the year in addition to the annual monitoring at the end of the year.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Very helpful.
Good question, JB. I recognize Vice Chair Duncan.
Thank you, Ms. White. Two questions. One of them is a follow-up to Mr. Buxton's question. Looking at the progress towards goals and objectives report, there were 6 goals listed, and for 2 categories, overall enrollment target and then EDS enrollment target, only one of the 6 schools met both targets. 2 did not meet either of the targets, and then the others had a mix. What is the process for when you're not on goal, if you will, or on target over the course of the 5-year grant? How is that assessed on an ongoing basis?
Mr. Whalen, would you like to answer that, or would you want me to?
I can answer it. I had a little difficulty hearing the question, so stop me if this isn't answering the question, but I believe it's how are we assessing both the overall enrollment target progress and educationally disadvantaged student enrollment progress. I think the first thing to say is, after year 1, because of where the subgrant approval happens in the process of the year, most schools have not, if they don't already have a weighted lottery in place, have not implemented a weighted lottery for the upcoming school year. So while we monitor the EDS enrollments, that's something that we will continue to monitor, particularly as weighted lotteries are implemented in future years. And so, as I mentioned before, the risk assessment mentions both, has indicated that for both overall enrollment and educationally disadvantaged student enrollment. So those are sort of 2 separate things that we're looking at, and we look at percentages of how closely schools are progressing to those targets and ultimately whether or not they're meeting those targets. And so funding stipulations can sort of be based on whether a school is within X percentage of their goal or below X percentage of a goal. And then, ultimately each year, as Mr. Machado mentioned, we are approving budgets and reviewing budgets with subgrantees. So we're able to have conversations about how resources are being used, particularly in an instance where enrollment may be struggling, how we can redirect resources towards enrollment to ensure that those numbers progress the way that they were intended when they applied for the grant. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you for that answer. Is there ever a place where if there's not meeting either of the goals on a certain number of years, what's sort of the cutoff point on that? If you said that, I missed it.
So every school has up to 5 years statutorily to spend the money. Most schools don't budget and plan for 5 years from the outset. So one of the options is to sort of limit the amount of funding based on the enrollment that the schools do have and redirect those funds in the hopes that the enrollment grows over the time, which would then extend the amount of time that subgrantees have to spend the funds and also gives us more time to monitor and not have subgrantees spend down on the funds too quickly. The other option is, I think, when we start to get to, we had our first year here and we see sort of how schools are progressing, and then not only looking at that just from a binary kind of yes-no perspective, seeing the progress year over year. As we get into years 2, 3, 4, we'll start to have conversations around termination of award, particularly if enrollments are lagging in significant percentages below the targets.
Okay. So second and last question, and I do agree with what Mr. Machado said. This is a well-kept secret that I'm sure can be very attractive for a number of applicants to try to pursue. And in that regard, it looks like there are a good number more who are pursuing it this year, and a good number more recommended for approval. So I think you are having the effect of making it better known. There are 6 schools that are recommended for this coming year that have less than 30% EDS, according to the numbers. Is there some cutoff for where what percentage within the school would be considered for the grant, or is there some place where if it's below a certain amount or above a certain amount, it no longer is considered?
There is no specific threshold or cutoff. As part of the review process, we look at geographic surroundings. Obviously, we're not expecting every school in the state to be able to recruit and enroll upwards of 70, 80, 90% educationally disadvantaged students. So some of it is geographic in nature. Some of it is growth within an existing school population. So what our state grant is based off of, we have some goals around X percentage of schools that are serving more than 40 or 50% of educationally disadvantaged students. But there is the flexibility for schools that are high-performing schools that are serving a low percentage right now and going to grow that percentage within the school, which would be significant given either the geographic or historical enrollment context of the school. So we wanted to have some flexibility to not exclude schools that may be in an area where recruiting that size of a population might not be as feasible as it is in other areas of the state.
Thank you.
Two excellent questions. Any other questions from board members? Okay. Just a note of correlation, this particular item fits nicely with Objective 7 in the framework, the planning framework, strategic plan that we discussed earlier today about increasing diversity and opportunities for equity and education among our charter schools. And so just wanted to bring that to the attention of our listeners. Let me just let us hop down to our consent items. We'll cover those quickly in conversation, and then I'll turn the agenda back over to the chair. For EICS 6, this is under consent. This is discussion that we had last month about Hawbridge School's request to increase its enrollment for the 21-22 school year. This is a school in Alamance County. It's a great academic record. They are increasing that to add some additional grades. EICS 7 is Sally B. Howard School for the Arts and Education to request to implement a weighted lottery, one of those that are taking advantage of that NC Access grant. And then Telra Institute's request to implement a weighted lottery, also a school that's taking advantage of that grant. Are there any questions on these consent items? Hearing and seeing none, then I will turn our agenda back over to Chair Eric Davis.
Thank you, Ms. White. We'll now break until 1 o'clock. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock.